Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is David Scheringa. I'm the host of your program, and I'm the president of Crossroad Bible Institute. Now, those of you that are familiar with Crossroad know that we have a two-pronged ministry. First of all, we want to change the hearts of people in prison to help them so that when they get out of prison, they don't make the same choices that they made that got them into prison. But after 30 years, we've also learned that there are things going on in society that make it difficult for people to survive when they get out of prison, and maybe even get people into prison that should be treated differently. And we call that systemic transformation. And I have on the program with me today someone who's been in the political realm here in Michigan, Joe Haveman. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Dave.
And
nice
Joe has, and I hope I have the information correct, but you have recently completed 3 terms in the Michigan legislature.
Correct.
And because of term limits, you can't do that for a few years again, right, or something?
Well, I can't ever return to the state legislature. I could return to the Senate if I wanted to in a few years.
Oh, you can't even get back into the legislature because of term limits?
Not into the House.
Well, that's no other discussion that we could have, right?
Exactly.
Because probably after 3 terms, you feel like I'm just getting to know what I'm doing.
Exactly. And we've discovered that now. People recognize that maybe term limits was too short. Maybe it wasn't as great an idea as we thought it was in the early 90s, but it is the law of the land, and it's very difficult to change.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me in churches, where they have 3-year terms for elders or deacons.
Right.
The first year, they don't know what they're doing. The second year, they're hitting their stride. And third year, they're getting ready to retire.
Exactly.
And speaking of churches, we actually, for full disclosure, have a history.
Yeah.
You and your wonderful family were members of our congregation when I was a pastor at Bethany Christian Reformed Church.
It was a long
Many
time
years ago.
Yeah, because all those little kids that you remember are now, one of them's married and made me a grandfather, and my daughters are adults.
A couple of them made profession of faith when I was there.
Sure, yeah.
And your wife was a wonderful person on staff there, one of the best I ever had, and so we go back a long ways. But you've always been interested in and dabbling a bit in politics, like on the Ottawa County Board or something like that.
Yeah, I did a stint with the Holland City Council. I did 6 years with the Ottawa County Commission, and always kind of knew that I'd end up in Lansing if it worked out with the family. So
right. Well, I'm sure you're going to continue to make an impact. But what the interest of our folks is that a lot of your legislation centered on criminal justice and correctional reforms, and so the one which I thought was very, very significant, when it said your legislation that you authored allowed juveniles to have a felony record expunged after correcting their behavior as adults, which is quite cutting edge, because it's only been in recent years that they said, hey, the brains of these kids are not fully...
Exactly.
Tell us about that.
That was probably one of the most proud things, or things I'm the most proud that we actually accomplished, because when I started it, and I had advocates from around the state approach me and say, just what you had said about the brain development, that kids need a second chance in their adult life if they did something dumb when they were kids, and that's fairly typical.
Sure.
So when I brought this bill
Except
up...
for you and me, right? We never did anything dumb.
Well, I could tell you stories, Dave. But when I brought this bill up, there were a number of people that said, this is never going to work. I mean, we are not a society that's going to just want to expunge a record.
Yeah.
And we pursued it. We brought it to hearing, and at the end of the day, it was a unanimous vote, all 110 out of the House.
Republicans and Democrats.
Republicans and Democrats. This goes beyond party affiliation now.
That is amazing.
And I knew that the tide had changed. I knew that we were seeing a shift in paradigm, that people wanted to have people that have made mistakes succeed in life. They don't want to continue to punish them forever. And we've got a long way to go in a lot of issues, but I know this tide has turned, and I'm just I was very blessed to be part of the beginning of this issue.
Right. No, you're on the cutting edge of it, and also our governor's been pretty good about these things from my perspective. What about the fact did this initiate also that, and I may not have this exactly correct, but that he signed legislation that expunged or sealed the records of adult felons if they had not recidivated after in 8 years.
Well, we just expanded it. I mean, the juvenile expungement bill passed in my middle term, and we were very happy with that. Well, third term, there was one of the Democrats from Saginaw brought up a bill that wanted to do adult expungement, expand the possibility of that. And that one took a little bit longer time because politics enters into these games, and she was one of those that was in a swing seat, and sometimes that's hard for her to, for those kind of people to get.
If you're a Republican, you got to be
through.
tough on crime and all that,
Well,
right?
If you're in a swing seat, sometimes you don't get the bills you want. So we had a Republican who is an attorney take over the bill because we wanted it to pass, and he worked it a number of times. And then at the last minute, he did a very kind thing. The elections were over, and he said, you know what, she started this. We got it where we can live with it. Let's give her the bill. So Stacey Irwin Oakes out of Saginaw got the Public Act in the lame duck session that allows for an expansion of adult expungement. So now some adults with, I believe it's one felony and a misdemeanor, can also have their records expunged if they've...
Expunged or sealed? Is there a difference?
Sealed, I think, is just it's not open to the public. Expunged means it didn't happen.
It's gone.
It's gone. So they can start from scratch.
Yeah,
I mean, on a job application, on a college application, a number of things, you don't have to disclose it because it's like it didn't happen.
So they don't have to check the box even.
Well, we can talk about ban the box and
okay,
that whole issue too. Yeah, exactly.
And what was the because I thought it was interesting because we know from our research, they say that if an ex-felon does not recidivate after 7 years, he's as likely to commit a crime again as you and me.
I've read that.
And
yes.
It's like Snyder just put one more year for good measure.
I've read that, and we have to start to deal with this issue of what do we do with the thousands of people that are coming back out of our communities to say, how do we give them a second chance to get them through that years 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and allow them to be able to re-enter society so they have a chance. So
right.
They have a chance to live their lives like you and I are and be as happy and as successful as you and I. And that's what this is all about, because we don't want them to recidivate. We don't want that because our prisons are too full. We're locking up too many people, and it's costing us too much money.
And that's of course what has been a little bit behind the interest of some people because of the budget deficits, right?
Well, and that's why you're starting to see both Republicans and Democrats come together on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we may have different motives, and frankly, 6 years ago, I started with the motive of trying to reduce the budget. Mm-hmm. That was about the time that we topped the $2 billion mark just before I came into office. And I knew that this was something that was going to be kind of an emerging issue because of that. So I found a budget item that I thought was big enough, that it was very relevant. It's still relevant. It's 20% of our general fund in
corrections.
Corrections is within the state. Now that's $2
billion
billion out of
education.
Well, it's not more. It's more of our state funds.
Okay.
Yes, more of our general fund. So it's $2 billion out of a $10 billion general fund budget. That's over 20%. No. We need to figure out a way to reduce that. That's why I got involved. I didn't know I was going to get caught up in the whole cause and fall in love with this issue the way I have. But it's been an exciting journey for the past 6 years.
Well, I've been very impressed with Governor Snyder, and I interviewed him.
Okay.
When he was a candidate for governor. And at that time, I was on the Michigan Campaign for Justice, which was, with later working for legislation, working to ask the governor to form a commission.
Okay,
for
and he appointed you to something.
Indigent Defense Commission. But in that interview, as he was a candidate, I knew he was a Republican, so I thought I would hit it from a fiscal point of view, just that we're talking about. And I said, does it make sense, Mr. Snyder, that we're spending money locking up people who had probably an inadequate defender?
Yes.
So they could be innocent, and they probably, in a plea bargain, were over-sentenced.
Yes.
Does that make sense to to pay for them and the bad guys be out there? Do you know what he said to me? And I have this on record. He says, Dave, it's not first of all about the money. He says it's unconstitutional and it's immoral.
Absolutely.
Now that just stunned me because so many politicians, when they answer questions, you don't know what they mean when they get finished. But this guy, have you found him to be such a straight talker?
Absolutely. I mean, he really is a unique person to be in politics because he tells you what he means. He means what he says, and he doesn't care if he's talking to Republicans or Democrats. He treats us both equally the same, and he's a class act. And I was very privileged to work with him for 4 years, and he taught me a lot about leadership and what it takes.
I'm sure he did.
I'm very happy with the time I had with him.
Well, it's just an amazing thing to see Michigan on top of this. There's with this juvenile thing, because you're sort of an expert in that. I want to get back to that just a second, because the Supreme Court made some kind of decision that juveniles should not receive life sentences for crimes committed in their juvenile years. But we still have a couple of, we have a lot of juveniles that are in our prisons here. It didn't say you should release the current ones. What's that about?
What the Supreme Court said, you can still have a life sentence for a juvenile, but you can't have one blanket policy that says everybody fits into that category. You have to treat individual juveniles by their individual cases. Well, frankly, that's kind of a common sense thing. I think judges.
Well, that's justice.
Exactly. Judges and prosecutors should be doing that for everyone.
Yeah.
But with our sentencing guidelines, we fit people into these pigeonholes based on the crime they committed and based on these sentencing guidelines. Well, you're right. We still have the Miller versus Alabama case that the Supreme Court ruled on, said, okay, you need to take in aggravating circumstances, mitigating circumstances. You have to look at the person's background and what led them to this crime. You need to look at their intent and what their mindset was. All those things that we talked about a juvenile does not have the brain capacity to make decisions as you and I do. Mm-hmm. So that's a great law. We were thrilled when Miller versus Alabama was resolved. What they didn't resolve was the retroactivity of it. Is what we do for those current people that were judged as juveniles, but they're no longer juveniles.
You would think that would come automatically, but it doesn't, does it?
Unfortunately, it didn't. And Michigan has 363, and that number was the number at the time that I worked on the bill, of people that are still in prison. They went in as juveniles, and I've met some of these men that their fate is unsure yet. And the Michigan Supreme Court unfortunately ruled against us and said no, until the U.S. Supreme Court overturns us, those people are still in prison for life. Oh,
that did go to the Michigan Supreme Court.
Yes, it did. So now it's back before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the gentleman who argued Miller versus Alabama was just here in Grand Rapids a few weeks ago. He is arguing it to the U.S. Supreme Court again to clarify the retroactivity piece.
Okay.
Now, we've dealt with it at the state to say that if the U.S. Supreme Court overrules retroactivity and allows those to come out, there are sentencing guidelines already in place for them. So it's not as though 363 people will have their gates open and they'll be released. Mm-hmm. They will have a mechanism to go back to court, and a judge and a prosecutor will determine again whether they will remain in court in prison for life or whether they will have a chance at a second chance on the outside.
Well, this sounds related to mandatory sentencing stuff, 3 strikes and you're outlaws. Yeah. We tried to make these things automatic, and like I said before, you tie the hands of judges, and they are prohibited from administering true justice.
Exactly.
And part of that, of course, is that people are thinking justice is payback rather than the restoration of shalom. But I want to come back to this after the break to talk a little bit more about this and how it connects with our faith. And then I want to talk to the folks about your brand new position working with Hope Network. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Are you in prison? Do you know someone who is? Through CBI Bible studies and encouragement from CBI instructors, More than 40,000 people behind bars are learning the truth about salvation through Christ and are developing deeper relationships with God. For an enrollment form, please visit us online at cbi.fm.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. I'm speaking with Joe Haveman, who has served on the legislature of Michigan 3 terms, and now, because of term limits, had to step down from that. We're going to talk about his new position at Hope Network, but we just want to finish up a little bit more of our discussion. Finish up. Well, we can't finish it up. First of all, I've been appointed by Governor Snyder to be on the Indigent Defense Reform Commission. You know something about that, I understand.
Well, Indigent Defense took 2 terms to get through the legislature. It was a 4-year process. And I came in with both representatives that worked on it. First one, Justin Amash, who's now the congressman here in the Grand Rapids area. And the second one, Tom McMillan, representative out of Oakland County, who was known as just a diehard conservative. And the thing that we had in common was the thing that the left and the hard right of Amash and McMillan had in common is this indigent defense. And Justin Amash started that back in 2009, working on that, and with the attitude that although we want smaller government, although we want government that's we can control and the people should have a voice, there are certain things that government, no matter what it costs, is obligated to do. And the equal treatment of prisoners, of people that are arrested in our court system, that's something that's paramount to our country.
It's in the Constitution, right?
It is. And Justin Amash believed that strongly. He worked on it. He left and ran for Congress, and Tom McMillan picked it up and worked at it for another 2 years and finally got it through. And it passed unanimously, I believe. And a good friend of mine, he was the Speaker Pro Tem. He now works for Governor Snyder. He said in his parting comments, he says, that was one of the sleepers. That was one thing that went through that we worked on it so long that it was, okay, it's about time, let's just vote it out.
We were just shocked.
And it was one of the paramount things that really passed in my term in Lansing that didn't get much attention.
Right.
But it was so important for people that cannot afford a good defense.
Well, I find as I speak around the country and so forth, and I'll be speaking on this issue in Detroit this weekend, that the average person on the street, even people that are upper middle class and educated, are not aware of this thing. They just think this is America. Everybody gets treated equal. Everybody gets justice. And when I explain it to them, their jaws drop open. And when I say to them, if one of our kids gets into trouble and needs a good defense, we'll mortgage the house for them.
Exactly.
But the poor have no options, and they'll see their public defender for 30 seconds, before the trial, and they'll get plea bargained out. People think that plea bargaining is getting them a better deal. It's usually not. They're threatening them with all kinds of of stuff that would never ever probably be applied, and to get them to bow. So that system, and it's amazing that you've been working on that as well. It almost seems like without knowing it, you and I have been working along similar paths.
We have been. We've been going in parallel paths for years, and we haven't seen each other in a very long time. So it's funny how
a pretty neat thing.
Lives cross.
Yeah, and what I'd like to talk about with you just for a couple minutes, and that is, for me, these issues come out of the depth of my faith.
Yes.
And I agree. I think that's also with you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
They have me on the Indigent Defense Commission because they want the faith-based perspective there. And when I was just recently, once again, for the second time, I was on Capitol Hill speaking in defense of the Democracy Restoration Act. And it was a bipartisan Senate review, or hearing or whatever, and Senator Rand Paul was there with the Republican version of the DRA. And Ben Cardin, a Democrat, was there with the Democrat. He was actually closer to the actual DRA, that the Brennan Center that we are presenting. And when I came there, I asked them well, you want me to do the faith-based perspective. Do you want me to make that sort of I could, gladly do a broader faith-based, so that it includes lots of people of faith. But they said to me, and the ACLU people were there too, and who we think is the enemy in some of our circles, but I've been not finding that to be the case always. But they said, no, we want your Christian perspective, flat out. Don't sugarcoat it.
That's great.
Now, I did make it very multi-faith friendly, but I thought it was interesting, and you must be finding that too. Our government and people in government, they're not against the faith. I think they're against radical extremism, which I am too. But talk a little, just for a minute, about how your faith and your worldview is what is about, not politics.
I started in this partly because I was friends with and colleagues with, met with frequently former state representative and Senator Bill Van Regenmoor, the late Bill Van Regenmoor, who was there in the 80s and 90s and really built this correction system, starting around the time of Ronald Reagan, when the entire country went down this road and say we need to lock people up for longer periods of time.
Right.
And you can see it on a graph in 1984 where our population just escalated here in Michigan.
Right.
So,
well, I think that they say in the 70s there was only 300,000 or 500,000 people in prison.
Up to over 2 million now.
And you can see that on the graph how that just...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was a conscious decision of this country to incarcerate people,
right.
And we're the most incarcerated country in the world.
Right.
So it was Bill Van Regenmoor's presence in my life, and he was a great man, and I have had great respect for him. That got my interest peaked in this. And then years later, I ended up at Ridgepoint Community Church, where Kim and I still go, and they had a fledgling startup reentry program.
70 times 7. We partner with them, yeah.
Yeah. So that's those two things in my life happened, and we joined Ridgepoint just prior to me thinking about running for office. As I said, the budget had hit $2 billion. And it's just, you can't make this stuff up the way God worked all that in my life.
You can't manipulate the situation.
And I tell people I'm not an attorney, I'm not a cop, and I don't have a close relative in prison. So there's no earthly reason why I should have been the advocate for this.
Right.
So it was intentional, and God put me here at a specific time. I carried it a certain distance, and I didn't get near as much done as I wanted to, but I'm just thrilled when I see both Republicans and Democrats in Lansing. When I still visit Lansing, when they say, Joe, we're on it, we're taking care of it, it's all your bills, everything you wanted, plus more, we're working on them. And I know that the time is ripe for this. So you're going to see a different judicial system in 5 years than we have now, and I think you're going to see fewer people in prison, and I think you're going to see, even more importantly, people's lives changed on the outside.
Well, I'm seeing it every day. People watching this program, listening to our literature, watching stuff out there. People who, for example, I was talking with a man actually who was a pretty large donor, and he is first quite questionable about my perspective on the DRA. What, having ex-offenders vote, And then the next time I saw him, he said, I thought about that, and I thought, why should we keep punishing them?
Yes.
And why should they not be invited to participate in society rather than sit on the fringes? So, people, when they think about it and are faced with the practical, financial, and biblical facts, they begin to change their minds, and that's a beautiful thing to see.
Well, you talk about continuing to punish them. I think that's where society, we need to grow away from this attitude that there's these life sentences.
Yep.
Person comes out,
Yep.
They still are serving a life
They're
sentence.
being punished.
Because they can't find a good job, and a good job is so important. And in some respects, depending on their crime, we dictate where they can live.
Yep.
We tell them that if they had a sex crime in their past, they can't even go to their children's school to see their children's programs in school.
Right.
So we need to rethink how we do our discipline, our punishment, and couch it with an ounce of mercy. And that's where, my heart is that justice comes with mercy, and you can't have one without the other.
The way I approach it is, yes, crime must be punished, because some people think, oh, we don't want to punish them anymore, we want to coddle them.
No, that's not the case.
No, but I believe that the punishment needs to be restorative,
Exactly.
forward-looking, but right now our punishment is retributive, backwards-looking.
Exactly.
So our punishment should not be payback, but it should be restoring a person and
Exactly.
restoring shalom. That's what I hinted at before. Justice should be restoring shalom, not payback.
Well, and if the speaker we heard at Calvin College last month says in his book, Just Mercy, Brian, I'm blank. Yeah,
what?
We're going to forget it.
Yeah, we are.
But he says in his book, you know, a person shouldn't be judged for their entire life on the worst thing they did.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of us make mistakes. I mean,
I would not want to be judged on the worst thing I did.
Oh, I don't want to tell you some of the things I did as a kid. That you know, and part of growing up in a small town is sometimes people think that's who you remain your entire life. But you grow. You grow up. You grow mature. You grow spiritually and professionally, and you shouldn't be judged on what you did when you were younger, or even as an adult if you've gotten past it and you've paid your debt to society.
We just have about a minute left here. I wanted to give more time to your new position. Just give us a quick thing. You are working with Hope Network and helping them with advocacy or something?
Yeah, well, the title is Director of Government Relations, and I'll be doing advocacy on a number of issues, but what I was excited about, and one of the reasons I took the job, is part of my work will be prison reentry.
Really?
So we want to grow that clientele that we serve at Hope Network with both veterans benefits and prison reentry.
Yeah.
So I'll be working in the community and as well in Lansing to try and reach out to people to say, how do we get people, once they've served their time, back into the workforce, back into a mentorship attitude where the public is helping them get to a restorative justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a whole big discussion there as well in terms of what kind of education should we be giving people in prison? Should it be vocational or liberal arts? But we're working on that with our college program, and you know, there's just a huge number of issues. And it's such a wonderful thing that you and I can be involved in it, each in our own areas. And there's so many more people who are learning and growing and understanding God's grace. And especially, as I said, that it's about those individuals who committed crimes, but it's also about us and society and the systems that are in place. That has to work together. We got to keep that in tension.
Well, Dave, as you find throughout life, when you reach out, if people want to get involved in this issue, what they will find is that they will be more blessed than anything they're giving to the people they're serving.
That's what our testimony of our folks are, and I'm sure the Hope Network people and volunteers as well. They can find out more about you and your position on the Hope Network website.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll get that up on the screen. And we got to quit, but we got to have you back, and maybe you can do a seminar here or something, because I think people would just love to hear your experience in the legislature and what you're doing now. But give my best to Kim and your kids.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for being with us. It's just been a thrill to have you on the program.
Great, thank you, Dave.
And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, because it's just been an eye-opening program to have Joe Haveman here. And we hope to see you again right here next week.